All right, we are ready for our next lesson. We just finished talking about fantasy and can it actually happen in the real world. Today we're going to be talking about different imaginary, like different aspects of it. So, overall, if there's something that happens in there in the story that can't happen in the real world, then it makes the whole text fantasy. Today what we're going to do is we're going to start narrowing our focus to different parts, and we're going to say, hey, look, this part could actually happen in the real world, but this part, no, that one's all imaginary. That one's all made up. So you're going to title your notebook Fantasy, and then we're going to say real versus imaginary. Real parts of the story versus imaginary parts of the story. And I just want you guys to remember that stories can be set in the real world or an imaginary world. In the imaginary world. Okay, real world or the imaginary world. And we are going to be doing another chart today. I know you guys just love charts. So go ahead, and once you've written this down, you can go ahead and twist your paper. I'm going to actually twist it this way this time, so I don't have to deal with that on my arm. And we're going to actually leave an entire blank section down here at the bottom, so you can use that during your classwork tomorrow if your teacher chooses. But I'm going to find my faint red line right here. I'm going to draw one red line to the next. Almost all the way down to the end of the page. Follow the blue line down to the next red line. And complete my rectangle that way. I'm going to have a thin line right up here. And we're going to start breaking it into columns this time. We're going to start with our title so we know which books we're talking about. Then we're going to ask, is it real or could be? So there's real things, there are things that could be real. Then we're going to ask imaginary or could be. And then we're going to talk about setting importance. So where the story is set is actually pretty important to what's going on in the story, because some things can happen in different areas that might not happen in others, or some things are acceptable over here that maybe here in the United States are like, that's just crazy, why would you do something like that? So there's different cultures, there's different ideals, there's different expectations for different parts of the world, and you have to remember too that from the past to now things have changed as well. And so things that may have been accepted in the past, we think, oh, well, why would you do something like that? Whereas back then, it was just normal, and that was how things happened. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and break this into 3 different sections. And I'm going to pull out 2 different colors. Let's do this one and this one. We're still talking about Westlandia and the Lorax. We'll start moving on to new books soon. But for right now, we're still talking about Westlandia and Lorax. And some things in that Westlandia that could be real, or some things that could be real in there. And when I think back on the story, his house could be real, because I live in a house. Oh, this is not focused. Autofocus. Let's see if it works. Yay! Okay, so the house could be real because you and I both live in houses or an apartment. The school while some of you may be attending school at home this year, there are other people who are actually up at the school building. So just remember that schools are real places, and eventually you will be coming back to the school as well. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit so it's easier for you guys to see. Okay, the other thing that I could think of is a neighborhood. Many of you are living in the neighborhood, your current neighborhood. Wes lived in a neighborhood as well. So those are some things, or other things that from the story that could be real as well. We're just having a hard time focusing today, aren't we? All right, what else, or when we're thinking about Westlandia, we also want to stop and think and consider, what are some imaginary things? And the big one that I can think of is that Westlandia garden. We've talked about it before, but I'm going to say it again. You're not going to get a wind that blows in seeds, that just plants one little garden. It doesn't blow seeds anywhere else in the area, just that one little garden. And then all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, you have plants that are the size of giant trees that have lived for hundreds of years. That's not something that could really happen. Now, why is the setting important to this story? If I think back on that story, if I didn't have that Westlandia garden, if we didn't have that magic garden, Wes would have still been unhappy. He wouldn't have made friends. But because of the garden, he started making friends. He started having classmates come over and hang out with him. And by the time school started again in the fall, it said that he was friends with people again. So the Westlandia garden made Wesley feel important and helped him make friends. Helped him make friends. So that was why our setting, our Westlandia garden, was so important to that story, because without that garden, he wasn't going to start feeling important, and he definitely wasn't going to be making his friends. All right, so the next story we're going to talk about is, you guessed it, the Lorax. All right, so here is the Lorax. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, or I've talked about this in other videos. With the Lorax, you have some different things that can be real, such as the fields, the ponds, the forest. You can even have a factory or a city, and those are all things that are real. These are all things that we would find in our world today. But inside of that story, we have some pretty amazing things, some imaginary objects and animals that don't exist in our current world. For example, the Lorax himself does not exist. We do not have truffula trees, the brown barbaloots, hummingfish. They were cute. And I've never seen a thneed anywhere. So those are all some imaginary. Now there are other imaginary objects and animals from the Lorax, but these are just the ones that I'm going to write down for our examples today. Now, we have these fields, ponds, forest, factory, and city are real objects. We also have our imaginary, or made-up objects. And these set up our setting, where the story takes place, where it happens, when it happens. And it really sets up the importance of the whole story, because the Lorax tried to get the Onceler to respect nature, but he didn't, and he destroyed the environment in that area. In that area. Okay, so this setting where it all happened, we had these beautiful fields and ponds and trees, and then because our Onceler did not listen to the Lorax, our imaginary being, we ended up with this factory in the city, and we destroyed all of this beautiful things and our made up, our imaginary animals environment because the Onceler did not respect nature. And that is something that could happen if we do not take care of our environment and our world as well. Okay, always be ready to discuss this in your next class with your teacher. As always, if you need to pause the video in order to be able to see what is going on, that is perfectly fine too. I will move this over in case you missed the setting importance section up here, the way you can see it. And I will see you guys at our next lesson.